So I just finished the first 2 episodes of Daredevil Born Again. Let's talk about it.
I'm Spider-Man.
Before we get too far into this, we're so close to 3,000 subs. If you guys are new to this channel, I would love to have you here. I reply to all of my comments. Also, let's try and get this video to 100 likes. I'm going to be covering this show head to toe, talking about everything, multiple videos. We're going to be doing some live streams. So I encourage you to subscribe to the channel. We have a great community here, and I, again, would love to have you. So we're going to be talking spoilers for episode 1 and episode 2 in this video. I'm going to be jumping around because there's so much that happens in just these 2 episodes. It's overwhelming, it's emotional, it's intriguing. I mean, there's so many different aspects to it with just these first 2 episodes that it's going to be a lot to cover in one video. So if I miss anything at all, please leave your comments down below. Again, I read all of them. So the beginning of episode 1, first 15 minutes, a big tragedy happens. We see Karen, we see Foggy, we see Matt. We get a little glimmer of hope of all of them, you know, carrying on their lawyer practice, being the best of buds, living their happy ever after the ending of Daredevil season 3, and that doesn't last. They're at Josie's bar and tragedy strikes. As we all assumed, based on the trailer footage, based on the cast doing their press tour and things that they've said about traumatic events happening in the very beginning of this season, we now see that Foggy Nelson dies in the first episode. This is a big swing. I think I've spent the last 2 weeks rewatching Daredevil, the Netflix series, and Foggy is not only just a main character in that show, but such a main character to Daredevil and Matt Murdock. Killing him off at the very beginning of his Disney revival show is very bold. Do I think it's a bad thing? No. Am I mad about it? Not necessarily. I want to wait till I see all the other episodes because the story that they're going to be telling here about revenge, retribution, and all of these different darker thematic elements, I think if the writing's there and they continue what they're doing in these first 2 episodes throughout the rest of the season and amp it up even more as the episodes continue, I think the death of Foggy is going to be something that people look back at as a necessary evil. Did I want Foggy to die? No, I don't think anybody did. And for a brief second, I thought Karen was gone too. Because Bullseye, Poindexter, comes back and he goes on a killing spree of revenge. I will say, if you did not watch Daredevil seasons 1 through 3 on Netflix, this is pretty much a season 4 with like a time jump. You're going to be very confused on who this guy is, how important Foggy is. I suggest watching that other series because not only is it perfect, I think it's required for this show. Maybe not required, but it would help a lot. So yeah, Bullseye kills Foggy at the beginning of this series, and we get a great hallway fight, one-take action sequence between them two. I thought it was brilliant. I did think the CGI was a little rough at points with the smoke grenade and things like that, but I can look past it. Seeing Daredevil do his flippy maneuvers and all that stuff was really cool, but at the same time, I couldn't be super excited for it because I know Foggy is at this moment dying. In terms of just design and film and cinematography, the choice to have Foggy's heartbeat play throughout that entire fight sequence, slowly slowing down and, you know, reaching the point of his death was beautiful. This is going to be a very dark season, and I think we've only scratched the surface. This is kind of like a, hey, get ready. This is not a happy-go-lucky, simple Daredevil story. I love how they've kind of redesigned the intro from the old show and made it its own new thing, keeping the same music, just a different version. They need to keep that. I'm glad they did, and I'm so happy with how it looks because it's beautiful. We then flash forward a whole year later, so we don't really get to see Matt grieve or Karen grieve over the death of Foggy, but I think this was a good choice to further the story to where I think it's going to be going in the next couple episodes. We catch up with Wilson Fisk and Vanessa, and surprise, they're not like together anymore. I mean, yes, they're still married, but they're not technically together. Fisk left after the events of Hawkeye being horribly dismembered by Echo, and then we have the events of Echo, so Vanessa's been back in New York, kind of running the ship. She is like the queen pin, and Kingpin is kind of her assistant now. Not totally, but in terms of running the business and doing these criminal things, yeah, she seems like she's in control. I think the relationship between Vanessa and Fisk is going to be really intriguing, especially with the ending of the second episode, which we will get to. Personally, I think it was a really high point for me seeing this conflict between them when we thought they were inseparable. Interspliced through this episode, we get several kind of amateur photographer, videographer reporting things going on with with BB Urich. She's actually the niece of Ben Urich, the reporter from Daredevil Season 1, an amazing character. Again, if you haven't watched that show, please go watch it. And she's trying to fill the shoes that her uncle left behind. And spoilers if you haven't seen the original series, but Ben Urich dies at the hands of Wilson Fisk. So there's a lot of things going on in New York. It feels very busy, and I think it on purpose feels overwhelming. Not only are there so many different characters, but there's so many different things going on in the world of New York City. We have vigilantes on the rise. We have crime on the rise. We have this running for mayor. We have Matt trying to be a lawyer again at a new firm, trying to kind of shelve all of the grief that he has over Foggy's death. And along with that, Karen moved away. Matt completely ignores Karen after Foggy's death, and this puts a strain on their relationship because he couldn't deal with it. He stopped being Daredevil, and life is just completely different. I said different like 5 times there. I apologize. And while Matt is not like back to being Daredevil at this point, they give several like hints towards him returning to Daredevil in a very Spider-Man 2 way. You know, Peter sees these people on the street needing help, but he doesn't do anything about it. He's choosing not to be Spider-Man. They do several things like that in this show with Matt, especially with his super abilities. He's able to hear things and see things and feel things that normal people can't. So when he senses people in danger, he's not doing anything about it, and it is eating him up. And to add to that, we have Wilson Fisk looking to earn the love back from his wife by running for mayor. We know the history between Matt and Fisk, so this sets him off as well. Matt actually meets this therapist who's going to be his love interest for the show, and I think she's going to be playing a much bigger role than we originally thought. More on that when we get to episode 2 though. As I was saying earlier, with New York just being in this state of disarray, we're seeing a lot of parallels to real life situations, and while I'm not going to go too far into that, I do think it's important. I do think it's really well executed in this show. And I think it's adding to the stress levels of not only Matt, Kingpin, and all the characters, but the city as a whole. My favorite scene from this episode has to be with Fisk and Matt sitting down at the diner. It's not like they're putting aside their differences, but they're moving on and trying to grow as people. Both of them are in extremely different places that they were in originally when they had their last encounter in Daredevil Season 3. Matt, no longer Daredevil, stand-up lawyer, struggling with personal things. Fisk, no longer an upfront crime guy, trying to be a stand-up guy and a hero for New York City, even though he's trying to outlaw vigilantes. They are very different, and I think this idea of people changing and being able to change is probably going to play a key point and theme in this series, and I'm hoping to see more because I loved this scene between them two. And at the end of this episode, like I was saying earlier, I really enjoyed the Vanessa and Fisk storyline going on. Fisk admits that he knows that Vanessa cheated on him, and I'm like, oh, this is getting spicy, this is dramatic, I really dig it, and I want to see more. This guy loves his wife, and he's trying to do everything possible to regain her trust after leaving her for so long. Overall, first episode was a really good introduction. I think it was dark, I think it was creative, especially the shot design. When Matt first uses his senses at the beginning of this episode before Foggy's death, the aspect ratio of the screen actually changes, and I thought that was a great touch. Does it feel different than the Daredevil series on Netflix? Absolutely. It's going to have some of the same threads and feelings, but it's definitely a little different. And while I thought it was really good, I actually liked the second episode a lot more. So let's go ahead and talk about it. At the beginning of this episode, we see this guy, Hector Ayala, go down to a subway, and he sees a guy getting beaten up. He tries to break up the fight, and one of the attackers actually gets pushed into a subway, and he dies. But it turns out the other bad guy that was with him was in fact a cop. So he detains and arrests Hector. We flash forward, and Matt hears Hector getting beaten up behind closed doors by police. Clearly these are dirty cops. There's a bigger thing going on that we don't know about, which we're going to touch on later because there's kind of a huge revelation with these bad cops. But through his senses and his abilities, Matt knows that he should trust this guy and defend him even if he couldn't afford it. Being just, you know, good guy Matt Murdock. And he does the thing where he asks Hector to tell the truth, but Hector doesn't give him the whole truth, leading us to believe that the vigilante that we saw very briefly in the first episode, White Tiger, is actually Hector. So Fisk has won the election. He is the mayor of New York City now, and he's really trying to do good things for the community. He fills in this sinkhole, and he's really putting on this public persona appearance of being a stand-up guy. And maybe he is trying to put the past behind him, leaving that life of crime behind, but he does some things later on in the episode that make you go, oh, you know what, he's still a little bad. I can't believe I totally forgot to mention the courtroom scene in the first episode with Bullseye, Karen, and Matt. That was really well done, and having Matt, being a lawyer, actually be a witness was crazy. I also love how Matt was kind of praying for the death penalty here. He threw Bullseye off the building, hoping he would die, and he did. didn't. Matt crossed the line and a line was crossed with Foggy's death. So it looks like Bullseye is just going to be in prison for the rest of the series. Maybe we'll see him again. I hope we do. We then finally get some face-to-face time with BB Urich, and she goes to meet Wilson Fisk, who is now mayor of New York. And this was really interesting because who died at the hands of Wilson Fisk? Her uncle. She's being that pushy reporter, and he's not surprised because he knows who her uncle was. Very interested to see where that plot line goes. We then catch up with Heather, I believe her name is. That's Matt's love interest, who's the therapist, and she's at a book signing, and this really kind of creepy guy comes up to her. He said he's a big fan of her writing and he needs help, like serious mental help. I'm assuming this is Muse, and if it is Muse, I think they casted this guy perfectly. I also think it's just good writing because if Matt's girlfriend is the therapist of a villain and maybe multiple villains later on in the episode, I think that's going to be super interesting to see how it all plays out. So like I was saying earlier, Fisk is trying to be a good guy, but some of these bad tendencies still leak through. With him being elected mayor, the police commissioner as well as half of the police force, if not more, want to resign. But Fisk stops this from happening because he shows a photo of the police commissioner's mistress and their illegitimate child. And while I don't think the police commissioner is completely a good guy because of this, I think that Fisk is trying to blur the line between good and bad. Meanwhile, Matt's partner finds out that Hector's wife is keeping secrets, and we find out now that White Tiger is Hector. I really like Matt's little detective buddy friend who he meets in the first episode. I think he's a really cool character. I want to see more of him. And it's at this point where my favorite scene of both episodes happens. The guy who Hector was trying to protect on the subway got away while the bad cops were trying to kill him, and Matt is trying to save his life now because these bad cops are after him. So Matt goes to his apartment right before these bad guys show up, and he does the thing that he does in the first season of Daredevil on Netflix where he uses his senses and he can hear people coming up the stairs, and he's like, you got 20 seconds to get out of here. Being a good lawyer and being a good hero. These bad cops break in, see Matt, and they end up beating him up and plan on killing him. And Matt, who's been restraining himself for over a year now, no fighting, no Daredevil, staying away from that kind of lifestyle, is now forced back into it because he's trying to do the right thing. And this is perfectly exemplified in the last shot of the second episode where you see Matt screaming. He's screaming because he doesn't want to do this anymore. He's being roped back into it. He can't help himself. He's letting the devil out. I think the second episode was stronger in my opinion, and with the first two episodes combined, I have a feeling that this is just going to get better and better and better as the series goes on, and I think that's what a lot of reviewers are saying. In complete honesty, I think I'm going to have to watch these two episodes again to grasp everything. I think when I sat down, I was like, oh my gosh, we're seeing Daredevil again. I was caught up in all of that hype, that excitement, expecting more of the same that we already saw, but this is completely different and not in a bad way. There's just a lot to digest in these first two episodes, and I am excited to watch them again because I enjoyed them. There's so many little Easter eggs too, like Spider-Man gets referenced, we have the Rogers musical, we've got so many different little things that are connecting it to the MCU, but keeping it grounded with the characters we already know. The last thing I want to mention is the glimpse of the tattoo that one of the bad cops has on his wrist. It's a Punisher logo, and I think in the comics there was some sort of storyline where these cops tried to take up the Punisher moniker, and I think this is going to be one of the main plot lines of the show, them using the Punisher symbol as an excuse to do crime. I mean, that's crazy, and I think this is how Frank gets back involved. I would not be surprised at all if Frank Castle pops up next episode, or we get that episode with the bank robbers from the trailer. Most importantly, as I always say, I read all of your comments. I've got to know your thoughts, your theories, all of the Easter eggs, anything I didn't talk about, let's discuss it down there. Get us to 100 likes, get us to 3,000 subs, and we're gonna have plenty of content on Daredevil. I will see you all very, very soon.